In this video, we are going to talk about why Finnish sounds wrong to so many learners who start learning standard Finnish and then later find out that actually it does not match at all what they are hearing around them. We are going to uncover what kirjakieli and puhekieli are, what their differences are, and what you should know about this as a Finnish learner. Let's get started. Some students are very confused by puhekieli and why does it even exist and why do Finns speak in such a different way than what we are learning in language courses. This is actually a comment that I recently got from one of my followers. Puhekieli. Puhekieli means the spoken Finnish. Everyday speech does not only sound different. Once you learn kirjakieli, the standard Finnish, it also sounds completely wrong and broken. You should decide as a nation which one you prefer, I think. Okay, let's get into this and let's see where this frustration is actually coming from and why we actually cannot choose. One important thing that you should know is that Finnish does not have just one correct spoken form, and it does not have just one correct form in general. We cannot choose between spoken language or between written language because both of these are very important, but they are used in different contexts. Puhekieli or spoken Finnish is not wrong or somehow inferior to standard Finnish, although some learners might think so. Puhekieli is not the same as slang. Some learners confuse puhekieli as something slangy or something that you shouldn't be using, for example, in a working environment, but this is not completely true. Kirjakieli or standard Finnish is not meant to reflect everyday speech. That's why it's also very different. We are soon going to see why, but it has a different function. And these two are very, very likely never going to merge as one, at least not in our lifetime, because languages are evolving and puhekieli is always evolving faster than the standard Finnish. And to begin with, they were never identical, and most likely they will never be identical either. So what is actually kirjakieli for? Kirjakieli means standardized Finnish or standard Finnish. You can compare it to, for example, BBC English. It's the standard form of the language that is used, for example, in news broadcasts and in books and in news. And also, you should use this when you're writing emails, especially if they are formal emails. It's also used in very formal speeches. Kirjakieli literally means book language, but it's so much more than that. It's not simply used in books or in written form. Sometimes it's used also in some spoken situations that are very formal. For example, in news or in political speeches. And you should also use kirjakieli in general in exams, unless otherwise specified. I mean, in the writing tasks in the exams. We are going to cover actually what to do in exams later in this video. Kirjakieli is stable and consistent, and that's why it's taught first. And that's why this is what learners get familiar with when they are starting to learn Finnish first. Because simply it follows always the same structures, it's used everywhere in Finland, and that's why it makes sense to start with this. So what is puhekieli for? Puhekieli stands for spoken Finnish. Literally it means speech language. As the name indicates, it's mainly used in spoken situations, and it's naturally spoken by native speakers. It's changing faster than kirjakieli, and also it has a lot of regional variations, aka dialects. And it's also influenced by context. We do not always speak the same way, even though we are native speakers and we speak Finnish fluently. We have normally different ways of communicating with our parents, with our friends, with our teachers, when we are going to the bank, etc. So language is always very context dependent, and this happens in all languages. Also, puhekieli has some differences depending on personal preferences. Even two people who have grown in the same region and have their parents from the same region and are hanging in the same friend group might speak a little bit differently in Finnish. Because, well, we are consuming maybe a bit different media, we prefer maybe one word over another, etc. And there is no single version of puhekieli. This is also the reason why puhekieli can be so tricky to learn and also to teach, because it's not standardized. Every person has a bit different way of speaking their own language. The key distinction to keep in mind is that kirjakieli was developed. It is an attempt to have one unified form of language that would reflect various dialects spoken in the region of Finland. Kirjakieli started to evolve in the 1800s. Actually, Finnish as a written language is quite new. There were some texts even before that, but they were mainly religious texts, or, well, also, for example, some simple books that were used for teaching people how to read. Those were the first resources written in Finnish, but Finnish actually started to evolve way more in its written form in the 1800s, relatively late compared to many other languages. It has been used actively in writing only for about 200 years. And it was built to create a national language, to unify the nation in a way. This happened in the time of Romanticism. As you most likely know, Romanticism idealized nations and that every nation should have their language and their culture, etc. Having our own written language was very important, even politically, at the time, and also probably led indirectly to our independence later in the beginning of the 20th century. Written language also supported education. Before this, the whole education system wasn't even that standardized, and many Finns didn't even go to school because Finland was an extremely poor country. In the 1800s, many people still starved to death because of poverty and because of the harsh climate and the lack of food thereof. But this started to gradually change thanks to the raising level of education and the standardization of education. It brought more opportunities to people, and this wouldn't have been possible without written language. Also, written language is very important for making communication consistent in official situations and when we are communicating with people from other regions of Finland. How about spoken language then? Spoken language has existed way longer than our research can even reliably go. Since we don't have any written records of how long spoken Finnish has existed, we cannot know for sure. But for sure it has existed centuries and centuries. And therefore, calling native speakers' way of speaking their own language somehow wrong because they are using spoken Finnish is quite an elitist way of looking at language. It is based on an assumption that written form of language would be somehow superior to spoken form of language, although actually the spoken form of language is what existed first, not only in Finnish, but also in all other languages as well. And of course, it has been evolving a lot since the earlier days. So, if spoken language is actually the first form of language, why shouldn't we teach it first? Well, we are running into a very difficult issue with this because which puhekieli or form of spoken language should we choose? Should we choose the form that is generally used in Helsinki or in Tampere or in Oulu, Turku, or for example, Lappeenranta? Because in all of these areas, there are different dialects and the way of speaking is quite different in all of these cities, just to mention a few. And you cannot really standardize something that is constantly changing. That's another challenge that we have. Since there's not just one correct form of speaking or one correct spoken Finnish, this causes a little bit of issues if we are just randomly trying to choose one form over others. And also we are running into the elitist problem again, because let's say if we choose the form that is spoken in Helsinki and we teach it as the so-called right form of spoken Finnish to other people and to learners, well, it's not really fair because there are so many other equally correct dialects and correct ways of speaking elsewhere in Finland. And does kirjakieli then sound wrong if you speak it? Well, not really. I would say that using kirjakieli in speech sounds formal, careful, and it often does sound unnatural in casual speech, but it's totally okay for beginner learners. So don't think that it's somehow wrong to use kirjakieli when you're starting your studies. It's better that you are speaking as fast as you can. It's better to practice speaking even as a beginner, and do not be afraid of making mistakes. Mistakes are completely natural, and people who hear you, they are going to understand that, well, you are not a native Finn, you are learning, and they are going to be understanding. So it's not really an issue to use kirjakieli. People are going to understand you everywhere in Finland. It's not wrong. Then when you are already at intermediate level and at advanced level, then of course it's important that you understand the nuances between when to use kirjakieli and when to use puhekieli already way better. And then I would say that using all the time just kirjakieli is not okay anymore. But it's not something you should be really concerned about as a beginner. So why does this distinction between kirjakieli and puhekieli feel so wrong to learners? Normally, the pattern goes more or less like this. First, you learn kirjakieli, standardized Finnish, and then you hear puhekieli around you, and they don't match. And then you are having this gap between like, what am I doing wrong? There's something wrong here, something that I'm not taught, and probably I should know. And this creates frustration because it can feel as if you had to learn two different languages instead of one. And it's understandable that there's this frustration. But I would say that trust the process. Don't try to understand everything at once if you are a beginner. You will eventually get there. But I still recommend to start first more with kirjakieli and some key expressions of puhekieli. And you will be picking up puhekieli also from the people around you naturally the more you learn. And also you can compare this to English. I think most of you who are following me have learned English as a second language, and you maybe remember that maybe you were a little bit frustrated in the beginning that the pronunciation was completely different from the way you wrote the words. And even if you are a native English speaker, you must have noticed this and you must have learned how to write at school. In a way, you did have to learn the language twice, so to say, because the way the words are said doesn't match the way they are written. So this is actually not a phenomenon that would be somehow Finnish specific. It also exists in many other languages, although the form is a little bit maybe different. It could be more related to the pronunciation, but still, this is actually not that different from the way we are writing, for example, English, versus how we are speaking it. Let's go back to the so-called one version idea that some people are suggesting that would be a better option. Well, language doesn't work like that. Spoken language evolves naturally, and it also connects to people's identity. Normally, for example, the area where they were born and grew up, then if they moved to another area in Finland, they might have learned another dialect as well and might use different dialects, mixed dialects, and change the dialects depending on with whom they are speaking. All of this is a very important part of people's identity. And standard language, on the other hand, provides structure and makes understanding across different speakers easier. And also it makes teaching Finnish easier. Both are needed equally. None of these is somehow better than the other. They are simply used in different situations and they have different use cases. Native speakers also switch between styles, as I mentioned earlier. If we are in a more formal situation and we are speaking, let's say, in a bank, we might use more kirjakieli or, let's say, more kirjakieli style spoken Finnish. And if we are casually speaking with our group of friends, we might use puhekieli and even slang. And this is completely normal linguistic behavior and shows high level of fluency. So actually being able to switch between kirjakieli and puhekieli shows that you have a good command of the language. What do learners then actually need when they are learning Finnish? To succeed in Finnish, you need both kirjakieli for structure and accuracy and for writing, and puhekieli for real-life communication. Even in the beginning, although you might not use puhekieli so much yourself yet, you need it to be able to understand what other people are saying to you. And now it's time to talk a bit about exams. Because if you are taking an official Finnish exam like YKI, you normally need both of these. You need in the writing part kirjakieli unless otherwise specified. And in the reading part, you most likely need more kirjakieli, but there might be also some more informal texts that are in puhekieli or have some puhekieli words. And in listenings, you might have both. It might depend a bit on what level you are being tested for, but at least at the intermediate level, you are already expected to be familiar with both of these, and the listenings also reflect that. In the speaking part, it's more recommendable to use natural spoken language. It's completely accepted, but do not use wrong register. What I mean by this is that do not use some heavy slang or some impolite words or curse words. That would not be okay. And the higher the level of the test you are taking is, the more aware you are expected to be of what forms are suitable and what not. If you are asked to be in a formal situation, then your language should reflect that. If you are talking to a friend, it should reflect that and be more spoken-like at intermediate level and at advanced level. But I would say this is not something you have to be so concerned about at a beginner level yet. If you still feel confused about puhekieli and you want to learn more about it, I have a full online course that goes more in detail about what the differences are, when to use them, and also teaches you common puhekieli patterns that are used in the capital region and in the nearby areas. I want to mention the area here as well, because as I explained earlier, puhekieli is not fully standardized. Well, it's not standardized and there are different variations. So I'm teaching the way that I learned to speak and the way I hear around me. As a native speaker, I cannot teach anybody else's way of speaking. Also, I think most of you are living in the southern part of Finland, in Helsinki or in some nearby areas. So this is very relevant to you. Even if you do not live in Helsinki or Espoo or Vantaa, you still hear this type of spoken Finnish a lot. You hear it even at Ykitest and in the media, on TV, etc. So it's really good to be familiar with it. In this course, you also learn real-life expressions and situations and differences between kirjakieli and puhekieli. You learn when to use which, and also you are going to learn Helsinki slang. So you learn more about the differences between puhekieli and slang as well. The recommended starting level for this course is A2. You need to have good solid basics of grammar and basic vocabulary before joining, because that's not something we go through in this course. I'm expecting you to know those things already. I do explain some grammar structures related to spoken Finnish in this course, but they are already more advanced than what you learn normally at beginner courses. But grammar is not the main focus of this course. And now I have a question for you. Was this confusing for you too when you started learning Finnish? And does your mother tongue have a very different spoken and written language? Let me know your answers in the comments and let me also know what your mother language is. It would be very interesting to know if this phenomenon is common in other languages that you speak as well. And if you like this video, remember to let YouTube and me know as well, so that this video is shown to even more people and more people can learn about spoken Finnish and the differences between spoken and written Finnish. And feel free to share this video with someone who you think might enjoy it too. Thanks for watching. Moi moi!